Professor Vivekanandan, the chair, and my co-panelist, and the distinguished people in the audience, and very bright students of Kerala. Since this is a dialogue, I don't have a ready-made presentation, introduction, the body, and the conclusion. I'll just share some of my thoughts on this critical issue. So there'll be multiple points. They will be maybe at a higher level of abstraction. There is some linkages. They're not separated. But it may not read like a structured essay. So I'll request the chair, the moment he gives an indication, I'll stop wherever I have said something. And nobody is going to miss anything. You can always have a Q&A session. I may get back to raise a few more points. So it's not going to be a structured one, but a different kind of points on this particular theme. Number one is a few years before India would become independent, the Second World War was ravaging on, and Pandit Nehru, who would subsequently become the Prime Minister of India, was in jail, and he was writing his pigeon diary, where he mentions that once the war would come to an end, India would become independent, and an independent India would play considerable role in a region called Asia Pacific. And then a few months before India would become independent, Pandit Nehru would hold the first important post-Second World War multilateral effort by convening an Asian Relations Conference in Delhi, inviting all the Asian countries and the potential Asian countries which would become independent, and held a meeting. 2 years later, when the Dutch returned to Indonesia to re-establish their colonial rule, and there was a military action, Nehru yet again convened an Asian Relations Conference in 1949, and in both these conferences, he floated the idea of all the Asian countries coming together, forming an association, no longer to be the petitioners to the Western capitals, and stand on the leg of the countries in Asia. Beautiful beginning of India's multilateral diplomacy. Indians always they think very big, whether under colonial rule or otherwise. We are big thinkers. And always we keep on talking about inclusivity. So when this Asian Relations Conference later led to the Bandung Conference, it was expanded beyond Asia to include Africa, Afro-Asian Conference. Subsequently, it again got expanded into the non-aligned movement, which covered almost the entire world, and India, by and large, was the leader of 100 plus countries which would subsequently join non-aligned movement and all. Now, from then on, if we see, a multilateral grouping or multilateralism generally is floated or led by a major power. When Pandit Nehru was convening the Asian Relations Conference, people sitting in the Policy Planning Division in Washington, D.C., Foggy Bottom State Department would be writing a report which subsequently became declassified. And there they would argue, after World War II, we need not take any proactive role in forming any kind of multilateral grouping in Asia. It would not work. People like Nehru will talk about colonialism or imperialism returning from the back door, so let us not do it. Then what should be done? Let us encourage the local leaders to come up with ideas and form a grouping, and once the grouping is done, then we should, of course, take the leadership role from the middle. That was the idea. They did not take any interest at all. In 1954, when the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization was signed, that time, against the recommendation of the report, the CETO was created in Manila, and the Americans were really disappointed that only 2 countries of Asia became members, and they were already having bilateral alliance with them. One was the Philippines, other one was Thailand, third one was Pakistan, right? And CETO ultimately got dismantled. It did not work at all because CETO and NATO, if you compare the articles, they are so different. It ultimately became a white man's club with Australia and New Zealand and France and Britain and USA forming the core of CETO. In the middle of the Vietnam War, in Bangkok Declaration, some Asian countries came together and formed a grouping, multilateral grouping, which they called ASEAN. Now, if you go to ASEAN countries, they say this was the first ever effort by the Asian countries to think in the Asian way and form a grouping. I have done archival research and brought out a book also, how ASEAN was actually, created by Washington, D.C. The US played the role of a midwife in the birth of ASEAN with documentary evidence and all. That's why many people in Southeast Asia, the scholars, they don't like me. They think that you never came to our capital to do research. I said I went to all the archives in the United States because this was US policy and all that. In between, the Japanese toyed with the idea of Asian co-prosperity sphere. There was a major power. It did not succeed at all. Right? And then little later, when there was second round of Cold War, in Afghanistan, that time, it was in South Asia that we had this idea of forming a regional grouping in South Asia, which came to be known as SAARC. And it did not fructify. Right? But as time passed by, during the Cold War time, India was completely out of what we call today Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific for Cold War regions and all. We only talked about non-alignment. We forgot about the Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific at that time. After the end of the Cold War, as slowly ASEAN evolved, then we found that this became a good regional mechanism in the Indo-Pacific, which talked about multilateralism, multilateral cooperation, expanded it into, including the communist countries, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia into it. It became ASEAN 10, today it is ASEAN 11. And ASEAN not only talked about cooperation among themselves, they became central to multilateralism and diplomacy, multilateral diplomacy in the region. So today you have ASEAN Plus, then ASEAN and defense ministers meeting, ASEAN and foreign ministers meeting plus. So an ASEAN and ARF, ASEAN Regional Forum, ASEAN and East Asia Summit. ASEAN became the central body which promoted multilateral cooperation in Asia. Now, if you really make a detailed analysis of the functioning of all these, what is the East Asia Summit? It's a great dialoguing shop. What is the ASEAN Regional Forum? Similar kind of thing. But the credit must be given that the ASEAN countries, together they could float some kind of grouping where the powers from the dividing lines of Cold War could be brought together. So Russia, China, USA, all were together in this, and India, of course, later became a full dialogue partner of ASEAN, joined East Asia Summit, joined ASEAN Regional Forum. So these kind of things are going on. Now, with this is one thing that I wanted to make a survey. If you see the other side, inclusion and exclusion was a major factor which either made the body successful or not so successful. Give an example. For a pretty long time now, the Indians become totally jittery when the Chinese are coming to South Asia or Indian Ocean. Likewise, the Chinese don't like the Indians to go and do something in the Asia-Pacific region. So India always wanted to keep China out from this side. China always wanted to keep India out from that side. So when APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, was floated, actually it was floated in 1989 by Canberra, Australia. They kept the Americans out. Washington, D.C. was furious. Then they arm-twisted them, bulldozed them, pressurized them, they were in. And India was kept out. And then when India applied for membership in APEC, the argument was India is not a Pacific country. Then I wrote somewhere, is the US an Asian country? So if a Pacific power can be part of Asia Pacific, why not an Asian country be part of Asia Pacific? But that was the argument. Until today, India is not able to become member of APEC. So this policy of exclusion. Third thing is, if you again study and try to analyze all the multilateral cooperative mechanisms, then you find that either it becomes mega, very big, very amorphous, difficult to control, becomes largely political, passing resolutions, nothing done in reality. That includes non-aligned movement also, right? So then Indians probably thought that why not have small groupings? Then when Indian Ocean Rim Association was in formative mode, I was actually watching the Perth conference which led to the birth of IOARC, and I wrote a paper there. India promoted the idea of having a few members, and once it stabilizes, then slowly we open the membership. But the Australians opposed it. Many other countries opposed it. And today, if you really try to understand IOARC, you'll find more faults with them in terms of implementation, because it's too big. Indian Naval Symposium, fantastic idea. So many navies are coming together, annually meeting and dialoguing and all that. Good thing, not bad thing, but again becoming dialogue forum, because it's too big. So smaller things are working better. So in the process, what happened was, minilateralism became part of activities in the Indo-Pacific region. And there are so many different types. Today, India is also part of a little minilateral called Quad. There are many people who are shedding tears now that, oh, Quad is going on and Trump is not giving any attention to this. It's not true. If you really follow the news, a lot of things happening on Quad, not military, but non-military aspect, whether it is counterterrorism working group, or there are so many other things, including your natural disasters, how to manage them. Things are happening. Statements are being made that this is alive, this is not dead. India is part of it. If you see the other side, this is another problem with multilateralism and this kind of diplomacy, that is always competitive. So this side, when you have US, Japan, Australia, India together, then on the other side, people are talking about another Quad called China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. They are competing, right? And then when the Americans find that in Quad, India is the odd man out, because the other three, they are part of alliances. So, and India is not going to accept any kind of military aspect of Quad. So now they have Squad. Again, 4 members, they call it Squad. Who are those? USA, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines. Again, targeting China. Now, in this kind of minilateralism, you have another problem. Everywhere you have a big power there. Now, the US, Japan, and South Korea, one trilateral has started. Earlier, Russia, China, India, another trilateral. They're again competing in a different way. So there's so many countries working at cross purposes, and true sense of the term, when we have maritime diplomacy and maritime multilateralism, then I think you are talking about liberal institutionalism, where you talk the positive things, not necessarily realistic. It should be win-win for everyone. Those things are in place, but not working because the realistic policy and all that. Today, what is the major problem? In the morning, I've been very carefully listening to everyone. So many good points came up. I learned a lot. But the fundamental thing today is US-China confrontation. It is not assuming Cold War proportion, but it cannot because of economic interdependence. It will be mutual suicide for them if they fight a Cold War of the kind the Americans fought with the Soviet Union. They cannot. But both of them are trying to have own structures, different kind of multilateral groupings. You have RCEP, Americans are not part of it. You have CPTPP, China is not part of it. And Americans have walked out of both anyway, like Indians. We are also not part of it. Japan is part of it. Japan is a major economic power, but we don't know how it is evolving, these two. But major powers are out. So one of the problems that we face in this kind of diplomacy is when a major power is in, they try to dominate. When they are out, it becomes dysfunctional. So how to manage all these? They are very, very critical points. Now, in times to come, what is going to happen? This is a little bit of astrology, then I'll stop, sir. Little bit of astrology. Yeah. Astrology is this. Many Indians are now worried about Chinese power. Chinese are coming to Indian Ocean. Chinese are, making their presence felt in India's immediate neighborhood and all that. Many, many serious studies are being done, and some have been done, and they're saying that the debate, the narrative about China's rise, China becoming the next superpower to replace the USA, is not going to take place. It has become full stop now. Rather, Chinese economic downturn have just begun, and they have fantastic data to back their idea. Until recently, again, we're debating America is declining, relatively declining. China is rising, America declining. All of you know what Trump is doing. This is the unipolar moment. one guy sitting in White House is using tariff as a weapon, and the entire world has been shaken. Literally every country, probably except India, including India, they are trying to manage the relationship with Donald Trump, get some kind of concession. Nobody is coming up in a group, either through multilateral diplomacy or multilateral institutions, to say, Mr. Trump, this is not rule of law that you have been, your country has been propagating for such a long time. You're violating the WTO rules. You people in your own country are challenging, this is not as per the American law. You're a law violator. Nobody is doing that for a variety of reasons. Everybody is negotiating with it privately. The Japanese, the South Koreans, until recently were happy with 15%. China from 145 to 45% because the Chinese flexed their muscle on rare earth and then they brought it down to 45%. Right? Look at the way he threatened, used tariff as a weapon vis-a-vis the European allies. So in the world order, when you have such a power which controls the global economy, political economy in such a way that every other country is prepared to negotiate and bargain and make a compromise rather than confront and fight, then in that case, multilateralism is dying, dead. Important multilateral institutions like United Nations are facing such problem that all kinds of call for reform is not happening at all. In the World Bank and IMF, where the rich countries are supposedly calling the shots because they have a lot of economic power, the fourth largest economy of the world, India, and China, the second largest economy, they are not members there. They don't have the voting rights, adequate number of SDR. So the existing multilateral groupings are not functioning multilaterally. Still, the domination, the oligarchy who are controlling that, but Donald Trump is threatening to dismantle the entire structure. So what is going to happen in the near future is bilateralism is back in a very big way, or small minilateralism, trilateral, quadrilateral, maybe pentagonal, such things are already happening. I have a long list, sir, but I would rather say more when you provoke me and ask me questions. So at the moment, let me thank you for your kind attention and conclude my speech. Thank you.